Hi there, Altenew friends, it's Jaycee for another crafty perfect pairing. Tucked away in my card making stash are pads of unused and pristine pattern papers. I know you have them too. Let's explore 3 easy ways to use pattern papers that go beyond your basic background panels. For my first project, lately I've been using this grid cover die quite often. The grid cover die cuts a full A2 size panel with 17 rows and 13 columns. And my first step for this card is going to be cutting a white piece of cardstock using the grid cover die. I'm going to set this aside and work on the next piece to my card. I'm planning for this card to have a really intense focal point, so I'm going to try to keep it really simple with the sentiment by using the Mega Hello die. But before I die cut any white cardstock with this set, I'm going to add a little bit of metallic splatter just for a little bit of shine and interest. From the 14 metallic watercolor pan set, I'm going to grab citrine, add a generous helping of water to the pan, and then using a watercolor brush, I'm going to add a generous amount of splatter to this panel. I die cut the Hello sentiment 3 times using white cardstock and stacked them and glued them on top of each other. And then for my last layer, I'm going to use that metallic speckled die cut to glue on top of this one. I have a final die cut stack of 4 layers of cardstock, including the last speckled layer, for just a bit of shine and a little bit of interest on this Hello sentiment. I will set this aside along with the grid, the white cardstock grid I cut from earlier, and start working on the main purpose of this video, which is the pattern paper. The paper pack I'm going to be using for this first card is the poured acrylic 6x6 paper pack. I'm more interested in this panel right here. So now that I have the cardstock that I want, I'm going to use my larger paper trimmer here and cut strips of this cardstock slightly less than 1/4 of an inch. So I'm not going quite to that line on my paper trimmer. Like I mentioned earlier, this grid cover die cuts rows of 17 and columns of 13. So I'm going to cut 13 of these slightly less than 1/4 of an inch strips. And I did keep the orientation and the order the same as I cut them. Now here comes the fun part and the point of this video. Is I'm bringing back my white cardstock grid, and I'm just simply going to weave this through to create a basket weave pattern. So in this case, I'm going to go from right to left, and I started from the back side of my grid and went in. So this next one, I'm going to go into my grid and then up. And as I continue this, you'll see that alternating the orientation of which I go into my grid will result in this sort of bricklay or subway tile type look. I don't know how many of you also crochet or knit, but there's something sort of therapeutic about doing these, which is why I enjoy doing it quite often. But if you cut your strips narrow enough so that they slide easily through the openings in the grid, getting a rhythm down is quite easy, and yeah, it sort of becomes a little bit meditative. And here I am on my last strip. Just going to keep working this through. And here we go, here's my final pattern bricklay for this card. If I want to change my mind, I could always use the back side. But I still really like the front part and the front color palette of this card. Now before I cut off any of this overhang, I'll just apply a small bit of adhesive to these frayed edges. And once I have this trimmed down, I can glue it down to my notes card base. And before I adhere my Hello sentiment onto my card fronts, I'm going to cut the tail end off of the O on Hello, just so that it fits a little bit better on my portrait orientation for my card. And after gluing down the Hello sentiment to my card front, that finishes this really interesting paper pieced subway tile type of background. I like paper piecing like this in repetitive backgrounds, especially for those pattern papers that you don't know quite what to do with, but you want something a little bit more exciting than just making it a background. And here I have it more as a statement piece, but the brick-lay pattern sort of complements the scripty and flowy style of the Hello die cuts. So speaking of paper piecing, for this next card project I'm going to make a floral arrangement inspired by decoupage. And what I needed for this card project is a bold outline stamp set, like Wavy Rose's stamp set, that has elements that are going to be easy to cut by hand, and that also doesn't have a layering component. So this stamp set is purely a 6x8 stamp set with outline images and coordinating sentiments. In my stamp positioning tool, I'm going to place and stamp these two large images. Now I'm going to leave the stamps in my stamp positioning tool, and then I'm going to grab the Enjoy the Ride 6x6 paper pack. This was part of a scrapbook collection, the Enjoy the Ride scrapbook collection from Altenew. And I'm just going to grab a few of the scraps I have of this sheet, maybe this one, and possibly one of these green striped ones. I'm going to take out my white cardstock and set it aside for a second. And then I'm going to position and stamp my scrap pieces in my stamp positioning tool, leaving the stamps where they are on the lid of my MISTI. Using the same jet black crisp ink, I'm going to stamp the images directly onto this pattern paper. I'm going to repeat that on the other two panels of pattern paper, so that's the brush stroke sort of peachy pink and this pink periwinkle and black pattern paper as well. Oh, well, it looks like I might have shifted this paper. That's okay. I'm going to disregard this layer, and we'll come back to that idea that I was going for. But in the meantime, I'm still going to leave these in my stamp positioning tool and set this aside for a moment. Now I'm going to use my white cardstock panel with the outline images as a map. And what I'm going to do with my colored cardstock pieces is fussy cut them and arrange them like so. Sort of like making your own puzzle pieces. As I go, I can use a liquid adhesive to glue down my cut paper pieces as I start coloring these outline images with my pattern paper. I guess you can think of this as sort of a mosaic inlay, but this is essentially what I'm doing is I'm cutting the pattern paper like decorative glass. Then I'm following a template to adhere the pattern paper or a stained glass. So that's my green element for these leaves. So that's the leaf portion of my map here. I'm going to move on and start cutting out pieces from both flower clusters here. And I am following the same procedure for the petals of the flowers. Is I'm cutting out my stained glass or my pattern paper, and then following my guide I'm going to place and adhere my pattern paper piece. I'll do the other flower off camera, but I'll move on to the next principle for this mosaic and stained glass type flower. Like I showed you all earlier, I mis-stamped this panel, and what I was going to do was use pieces of this pattern paper to fill in the rest of the flower and open space that I have on this mosaic. But instead I'll use some solid washi tape to sort of balance out this whole appearance. I'm using the Tea Party washi tape set, and by using the transparent qualities of washi tape, I can gently fill in these other areas of my flower. So what I'm going to do is use my finger as a brayer and adhere the washi tape to a petal that I want to cut out. And then using a craft knife, I'm only going to apply enough pressure to cut the washi tape, but not the paper. And unlike the pattern paper, I'm going on the inside of the black outline. I'm going to peel back the washi tape, and what I have now is a solid layer of washi tape that fills in this petal. I can use other washi tapes as well. This is another one from the Enjoy the Ride scrapbook collection. This is from a washi tape bundle, but I would be careful with these darker portions on the washi tape, as it might make it really hard to see your black outline on the map underneath. Alright, so again, for my last piece on this flower, I'm going to burnish. I think I said brayer earlier, you know, just words sometimes. I meant burnish. I'm going to burnish the tape onto this open space, and then use my craft knife to go around and cut on the inside portion of the black outline. And I'm not applying too much pressure. My blade is sort of dull, so I'm not applying too much pressure, just enough to cut the tape but not the paper underneath. And then I'm going to carefully remove the negative space from the washi tape. And there we go, that's the first set of petals done. I'll repeat the same idea on the remaining portions of the leaves. So the reason why I didn't move the stamps from my stamp positioning tool is now I can fill in these sort of empty areas that I have, or the gaps that I have between these mosaic pieces, and I can restamp them, and hopefully it'll give it more of a perfected appearance. So I'm orienting my white cardstock panel back in my stamp positioning tool. I like to orient my pieces to my top right corner, so that's what I've done. And then I'm going to bring back the same dye ink up the images, and before I fully depress, I'm just going to absolutely verify that I have everything lined up, and I do. And then I'm going to press this down, and hopefully the ink will fill in between those gaps, and this will also help hide some of my imperfect cutting around the paper pieces. So there we go. Now I can remove these stamps from my stamp positioning tool and worry solely about this cardstock piece. I went ahead and used the coordinating dies for Wavy Roses stamp set to die cut both of my images for my card. I skipped ahead and pre-planned for this arrangement using my Altenew cutting mat. And I regret that I have this misstamped piece here, so I'm actually going to turn it around, and luckily there's a lot of floral elements that I can supplement to my existing arrangement that I can fussy cut and arrange to fill in some of these gaps I have here in my floral bouquet. I skipped much further ahead and added a sentiment to my splattered background, and now I'm simply using the Instant Dimension foam tape to adhere all my floral elements to my card front. And once I adhere down my final floral element to my card front, that finishes my mosaic inspired floral arrangement featuring some interesting pattern paper. For my final card, I want to show you all that the Craft a Flower monthly subscription service is not just for your gradient cardstocks. You can see here that your gradient cardstocks will make a beautiful and colorful arrangement, but you can use your Craft a Flower series with patterned papers for a much more interesting, playful, and bold arrangement. So here I have the Wildflower 6x6 paper pack. Again, this comes from the Wildflower scrapbook collection. And luckily in this set, there is a slight gradation of color that will coordinate beautifully with the layering set found within Craft a Flower Peruvian Lily. Craft a Flower Peruvian Lily requires 6 different colors. I have 4 of them here in lightest to darkest tonality, from what I have gathered from the layering image from the Craft a Flower packaging, so that my color tones match with the layering set here so that I still get a dimensional flower. Now for the yellow and orange portions, I've decided to supplement this mix with scraps of the gradient cardstock set. This one is in Summer Afternoon, so that coordinates with the Summer Afternoon layering family of inks. And essentially I'll just start die cutting. Now I won't show the whole die cutting process, I'll just show the final layers that I have once I finish cutting all the pieces to this Craft a Flower set. So here are my layers for 2 different flowers here. They're essentially the same except for this one. I just decided to use the reverse side of what's on this 3rd detail layer, just for a little bit of variation between the 2 flowers. But this is the order that it should go in according to my layering guide, is from top to bottom, and then of course all of these auxiliary pieces here that help supplement the flower. But for the most part, these are the major elements or major layers that will get glued on top of each other. So this will go onto this one, this on top of this, and then this one on top of this one. So I will go ahead and do that now using a liquid glue, and I'll show you the final results of assembling all of these pieces of pattern paper and a few pieces of gradient cardstock. My 2 flowers are almost complete. And before I glue these pieces onto my flower, I just wanted to take a look at this to see if I like how much dimension I'm getting. Because I actually have another tip for you for these pattern paper flowers. For me, these detail blending brushes aren't just for stencils and getting into those fine areas. I think these detail blending brushes are also great for painting with ink. I'm going to use the Golden Sunset family of inks from Altenew, and I'm going to use these colors to sort of supplement and paint over some of these areas that I want darker. But essentially what I'm doing here is I'm doing light strokes of almost ink blending on these tips of the petals and other areas that I want a little bit of depth. Now, because of the small footprint of these brushes and the really fine bristles, I'm going to end up picking up a lot more ink just with a few taps of my brush. So you can see right away the sort of change I'm getting and the drama that I'm getting at the base of the petals here, just to add a little bit more darkness. And again, I'll apply just a few touches to the tips here, just for a little bit more interest. You can immediately see the difference between these two. I realize that they're different layers, but right away you can see the sort of depth that you get just by adding a little bit of ink to the flowers. So I will do the same with this one here, but I won't go as intense. I'll use Snapdragon for the other flower, and again, I don't have to use a lot of ink to get a lot of dimension on these petals. And just like that, I'm ready to start gluing down the anther portions to these flowers. So I skipped forward quite a lot, and all I simply did was cut just the solid layer for the leaves using the same cardstock pack, the Wildflower 6x6 paper pack, and then I added my sentiment using the same inks as the detail brushing that I did earlier. And then lastly, I'm going to foam mount and adhere my most foreground flower to my card front. So just as a recap for this card, I used a variety of pattern papers, but I made sure to pay attention to their tonality so that I can use them in a layering die cut set. And then of course, for a little bit of added dimension, I used the detail blending brush to add little pops of color on tips of petals or the base of petals, just for a little bit more shadow. And if this layout looks familiar to you, I actually did something similar for the release, so I just straight up copied myself on this card. But yeah, that finishes this layered die cut pieced flower with a little bit of dimension from the help of the detail blending brushes. So as a recap, we weaved, paper pieced, and layered pattern paper in this card making tutorial. I have many videos on the Altenew channel all about shopping your Altenew favorites and pairing them with newer releases. My Perfect Pairings with Jaycee series airs every second and fourth Sunday of the month. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss any crafting tutorials from myself and my Altenew friends. Thank you so much for watching this perfect pairing with me, and I'll see you very soon for the next one.
Hello there, crafty friend, Lydia here. Just popping in to say that you can get your daily dose of crafting tips, techniques, and tutorials just like this by subscribing to the Altenew YouTube channel. All you need to do is click on that little bell up there and you will never miss a video. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.